This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. We end today's show by remembering the renowned Honduran environmental activist Berta Cáceres, who was assassinated a year ago in her home in La Esperanza, Honduras, just before midnight, March 2nd, 2016. Berta Cáceres was the co-founder of COPIN, the Civic Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. In 2015, she won the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize for her decade-long fight against the Agua Zarca Dam, a project planned along a river sacred to the indigenous Lenca people. On Thursday, hundreds rallied outside the Honduran Supreme Court building to demand justice for Berta Cáceres and for the license of the company behind the Agua Zarca Dam to be revoked. 8 men have been arrested as suspects in Berta's killing, including 1 active Army major and 2 retired military members. 2 of the suspects reportedly received military training in the United States. Also Thursday, here in Washington, D.C., Georgia Congressman Hank Johnson reintroduced the Berta Cáceres Human Rights in Honduras Act, which seeks to withhold U.S. military aid to Honduras until the Honduran government addresses human rights violations by its police and security forces. We're turning now to a new investigation that reveals further ties between Berta Cáceres' killing, Honduran military intelligence, and the United States. Joining us from London is Nina Lakhani, a freelance journalist who's been based in Mexico and Central America for the last 4 years. Her piece in The Guardian is headlined, "Berta Cáceres' Court Papers Show Murder Suspects Links to U.S.-Trained Elite Troops." Nina, welcome to Democracy Now! What are those links?
So the US over the last decade or so has really focused a lot of its military training in Central America on special forces. We know that over a period of, I think, 5 years, 2008 to 2014, the US went 21 times to Honduras to train their special forces. 2 of the military men who have been charged with her murder and the attempted murder of Gustavo Castro were special forces. So Major Mariano Diaz, who was he is a veteran special forces officer, at least 7 years according to his military records, and also Sergeant Henry Hernandez, who had left the military in 2013, but he was special forces 3 years in the special forces and worked under the direct command of Major Diaz.
And what about Douglas Giovanni Bustillo?
Bustillo, he did receive some training just before, as a cadet, I believe, just before he finished his initial military training. Both him and Diaz, who entered the military together, both went to the US to receive training courses. Bustillo was he did some early training in the School of Americas, I think back in 1997 it was.
So talk about the evidence that you've seen, from text messages to phone calls, and if you can recreate for us what you think took place.
So the evidence really points to, I think, a very well-planned military operation really that took place that night. What we know from witnesses is that there is a police and military checkpoint as you come into Esperanza. And that night, many witnesses have told me and other investigators that there was no one there that night. There was no one at the base that night. We know from phone records and we know from testimony that Hernandez and Bustillo, who knew each other from working in private security. So they in the months leading up to Berta's assassination, had been working together in private security. We know that they were in La Esperanza at least 3 times in the weeks leading up to her murder. The way that at least 4 people were there that night. Hernandez admits to being there, and at least 3 other civilians who have been accused of the murder are placed at her house because of telephone analysis. They went in, they knew what they were doing, they knew where they were going. All the evidence points to that. The house, inside and out, had been under surveillance, that they'd been there several times. Her house was sort of set back from the main gate. It was a guarded entrance. It was a private community. There was a guard there that night who, it's very likely they had communication with him. I'd met with him before because they came in it was very dark. It's an isolated place. They went in. They knew where the door was. They knew where she would be sleeping. So the evidence points to that. You know, that her house and the area surrounding it had been surveyed, had been studied beforehand. And all of that points to really like a military type operation. Hernandez is a one military person that is placed there that night. Like I say, he was special forces. He'd worked under Diaz, and he was a highly he'd been a decorated sniper. It's not clear whether he pulled the trigger that night at all, but it would appear that he was in charge of the operation on the night.
And why would they want?
He was a low level military officer. He only rose to the rank of sergeant.
Nina, why would they want Berta Cáceres dead in this last minute we have?
I don't think the people under arrest probably did. She was, the context of Berta's death, that she was the most well-known activist, not only in Honduras, but probably in Americas at the time of her murder. None of the individuals who were under arrest, none of the 8 had anything personal to gain from her being killed, and the idea that someone of her, someone celebrated as her, could be murdered without, at least the implicit knowledge of people higher up in the armed forces or even the government and the company, I think is highly improbable. None of the 8 who are under arrest had anything personal to gain.
But the government, and has the U.S. been held accountable?
No. I mean, I think the U.S. wouldn't. I don't think the U.S. government would, wouldn't admit to bear any responsibility to Berta's assassination. I think it's important to remember I interviewed her in 2013, just around the elections, and she was publicly denouncing the fact that she had been told and had been made aware that her name appeared at the top of a military hit list in which I think there were 16 other activists. She was one of 16 activists. She was telling people this. She publicly denounced.
We're going to continue this conversation after the broadcast, and we'll post it online. Nina Lakhani, thanks so much for joining us. We have a social media full-time fellowship. Check our website. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.